Yo, so I'm going to preface this, or preface, I don't know, preface. I have just woken up from a nap and I'm probably not in the best cognitive space, but let's fucking do this anyway. Cool. So I put a poll out which asked what people would rather hear about, common shoulder injuries or common elbow injuries. It was pretty close actually, but I think elbow inched it out, which is actually quite useful because it's very difficult to talk about elbows without addressing the shoulder because they both stem from the same cause, which is the rib cage. So we're going to talk about elbows in the two commonmost types. Now I'm going to just again add another preface onto this and say that pain is a very complex subject. Like there is more to it than just structural issues or perturbed patterns or like bones twisted and things. There's the biopsychosocial model which explains a lot more about pain. You could have some kind of like structural anomaly and be in a lot of pain, or you could have some kind of structural anomaly and have absolutely no pain, or you could have like the tiniest amount and have either. Like it's entirely down to a lot of different factors, but I'll not go into that. So just bear in mind that this video isn't going to necessarily fix any elbow pain, but if you do have a structural anomaly and you are in pain, this might set things back in place and might relieve some of that pain. And it's quite common that it does. So, elbow pain, right, cool. So we have two predominant types of elbow pain that I'm going to talk about today. I'm going to talk about medial elbow pain and lateral elbow pain. Yeah, no, I'm just going to talk about elbow on the inside, pain on the inside of your elbow and pain on the outside of your elbow. Inside is often referred to as like golfer's elbow, and outside is often referred to as tennis elbow. And essentially they're exactly the same thing, just in complete reverse. So, medial elbow pain. Something we have to bear in mind when we're talking about this is the body's natural like flip-floppiness, or it's like it creates what's called a zero-sum effect. So if I have a straight line here and I have something like deters to the right, the thing underneath it is going to deter to the left, etc. So we're going to have this kind of like zero-sum in order to maintain balance. If they both went to the right or left, I can't decide which direction this is. If they both went in this direction, you would just fall over. So if I had a leg that externally rotated and then my tibia externally rotated and then my foot continued to rotate and I had nothing to stop that, I would just forever be circling around and there would nothing ever stop it, or my foot would just screw off. So bear that in mind because it's a really important concept in what happens at the bones and what happens at the joints. So back to medial elbow pain. I'm keeping that in. Back to medial elbow pain. Medial elbow pain is caused predominantly by an external rotation bias of your humerus, which forces your forearm to pronate in order to keep that balance. Now what that does is it applies a lot of compression on the outside edge of your elbow. So this is turning in this direction and this is turning in this direction. It creates a lateral force which essentially is going to push from one end open onto the other side. So we're getting kind of like an opening up here. And we have to bear in mind that bones aren't straight. They're not like one long straight thing. It has a twist in it. It's got a head at one side. So if I twist my humerus and put it in a position where it kind of internally rotate as well, that node on the end of a bone, so imagine it looks more like this, is now going to push onto the muscles on the side of my forearm. Which kind of like is, you're getting this weird double stretch effect where like one, they're being stretched when I move, but they're also being stretched from the inside out. Like the what the fuck, it's not epiphyseal plate, I don't know. The bone head is actually pushing over the tissue, which would cause a lot of discomfort and stop them from really working as well as they could. So it's pretty much impossible to talk about elbow or shoulder pain without addressing the root cause, which would be something along the axial skeleton or the rib cage in this case. So we have a curved rib cage. Your rib cage should have like a convex structure to it. And we have a shoulder blade that has a concave structure to it. And they slap and fit together nicely, which allows for this kind of like fluid, what we would call like scapular humeral rhythm. Allows the shoulder blade to slide over depending on what position the humerus needs to be in. If there is a compression and this curved rib cage squeezes from one end or the other, that shoulder blade can no longer slide as it needs to in order to get access to certain ranges of motion. So we've essentially flattened the rib cage out, we've created compression, and this can no longer slide how it's supposed to, which will form some kind of restriction. And that can happen from either the front or can happen from the back. In the case of in the case of internal rotation, it happens more at the front. So these ribs here not contract, but they get compressed, and the pump handle mechanics kind of gets pushed down, which stops genuine IR from happening. So we're going to quickly test for internal rotation, and then we'll do an exercise, and then we'll retest. And I'll do this all in one, so that you can see like exactly how long it takes and how big a result you can get just from this very small exercise. So we're down on the kitchen floor, which, let's be honest, is the best floor in the house. Cool. I'm going to test my left because I know my left is much more restricted than my right, for many reasons, but there's a big one there. You can't see me. Let's just tilt you down. There we go. If you lie on your back and put your shoulder at exactly like 90 degrees with your chest, so just straight out to the side, and you're just going to let that drop without my shoulder coming off or dumping up. So for me, that's about there. I could push it a little bit further, but you see how my shoulder starts to roll as I push it further? Really, that's kind of my limitation right there. So we're going to hit what's called like all four breathing, and just literally, this is the easiest thing to get into. Go into a quadruped. You're going to tuck your bum ever so slightly, and then we're going to reach our shoulders and just breathe. A nice long open mouth exhale for 5 to 7 seconds until you feel your obliques kick on, then pause, and then a silent inhale through the nose. And we'll just do 5 reps, and honestly, like, the difference is stupid. So we'll set up. Cool. So that was about 5 breaths. I'll probably make that a little bit quicker so you don't have to watch me for a minute and a half, like just fucking breathe. We'll tilt this down and we'll just test my left again. So left internal rotation, set for 90 degrees. I'll shoot it in the camera. Wow. Canny wedge. So I've got from maybe about here to here. Like that's probably what, 45, maybe 50 degrees. If I was to do another set, I bet I could bring it down a little bit further. See how my shoulder starts to pop up here? Yeah, that's a canny improvement for literally like a fucking minute of training or minute of breathing. I'll explain what we just did essentially. Right, Brill, welcome back to the other side of the kitchen. Like literally, that's fucking moved over there to here. But cool, so I'll explain what we've essentially done there. So air is a gas that will always follow the path of least resistance. So you can kind of direct it depending on what's going on. And your rib cage is essentially this kind of like cylindrical, spherical tube. If I tilt myself on my front, air will fill up from the bottom first. So you see, similar to a liquid, if I tilt it on its side, it's gonna fill up from here and then fill up from the top. If I was standing, it's going to fill up from the bottom of my lungs and then to the top. If I was upside down or inverted, it's going to fill up from the top of my lungs and then in the bottom, which is just kind of basic physics. Like, boom, everything drops to the bottom. Like gravity works. Like that's essentially the process we're doing here. And what we're effectively doing is we're using that exhale to pin my ribs down. So my external obliques are stopping this flaring from happening, and they're pinning that down. Now, if I'm in that inverted position and I can't breathe into my belly because they're pinned down, the only place that I can move to inhale is the front of my ribs, essentially. You will see as well, I move from the back, but it's going to fill from the front first, which is going to literally expand from the inside out. So it's like you're stretching, but stretching the bones from the inside out. If you imagine your lungs were a balloon and we filled them up, they would boom, 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 boom. Not allowed to make a gif of that. Way! Yeah, they would fill up like a balloon and expand those ribs. Now, if you have a restriction, all that's happening is those ribs have contracted or compressed and the balloon's not popping them open. So it's going to travel to the next path of least resistance, which are probably like belly breathing or something. What we're trying to do is restore natural ribcage dynamics. So we're pinning this down and allowing this sternum to kind of like pump handle up. I'll touch more about ribcage dynamics on a completely different video, but that's what we're effectively doing. We're restoring this ability for us to lift the ribcage from the inside without like using our neck or anything. They should all be very chill and super relaxed. But if I pin these down, then the only place I've got to expand is from the actual chest. Believe it or not, your lungs are in your ribs. Your lungs are in your chest. So we should be breathing from our chest. And what that will effectively do is restore that internal rotation. So allow my humerus to actually internally rotate, which kind of has like this untwisting effect. So if I'm twisted on my humerus and twisted in my forearm, if I untwist my humerus, the response is my forearm doesn't have to twist as much. So I end up with this kind of like straight pattern. It's no longer boom, boom. It's, oh, hang on. There we go. And I mean, you can probably test this yourself. You might be restricted in how much you can actually supinate. Like, I find it very difficult, if I put my hands out in front of me, I find it difficult to turn my left hand up. Like, that's, you see how my elbows start caving in? I can turn my right hand up a lot more than I can turn my left hand. That's because I'm limited in internal rotation, as we just saw. As I improve that internal rotation on my left side, I'll be able to supinate more because it's no longer in a position of external rotation and this forearm's no longer pronated. So in order to supinate, I have to really fucking wrench that round, and I just can't. Whereas if I start from a position of internal rotation and a less pronated forearm, I can really twist that under. Does that make sense? You can't externally rotate if you start from here, but if I started from here, I could do a whole load of motion. We're back on the floor and we're going to explain a little bit more about lateral elbow pain. So if medial elbow pain is this externally rotated humerus and internally rotated or pronated forearm, lateral elbow pain is this internally rotated humerus and supinated or externally rotated forearm. Fairly simple, exact same but opposite. What that will do is it'll put pressure on the inside of the elbow, blowing out the outside of the elbow. So how do we fix it? Well, if this is stuck in internal rotation and limited in external rotation, we want to give it more external rotation. To do that, we'll hit the same breathing, long, slow exhale, out through the mouth, pause, in silently through the nose, and we'll tip ourselves on our back so the air fills from the back first. So we'll go in what's called like a hook lying position. However, we're also going to throw in a low reach. In this low reach, I can touch on this a little bit more, but this low reach essentially is just going to spread your shoulder blades apart and expand ribs T2, 5 to 7, which is the predominant area that gets stuck for external rotation. So flip onto your back, reach for your ribs, reach for your knees, sorry, and then you're going to peel your bum off the floor ever so slightly, not by crunching up. We're going to do it with our hamstrings. So I'm going to dig my heels into the floor and pull them back towards me, which will pull my hamstrings on a considerable amount. And then I'm going to reach for my knees and just totally passively, totally chilled. Now we'll retest our external rotation. Ooh. Done. Oh, I didn't test my external rotation to start off with. Never mind. My external rotation before I started was kind of like here. I tested it in the other video, but then that video didn't record. Now, pretty easy to get down to the floor. And what I will say though, is if you notice my ribs, if I keep them pinned down, it's considerably more difficult than if I let them flare up. If I can only get to here and I let my ribs flare up, I can get a little bit further down. So keep them kind of like, not pinned down, but don't let them cheat the exercise. Start with your hand just at 90 degrees, let it drop down to the bottom, give this exercise a go, let it do it again, and see if you've made some gains. So what we've essentially done there is the same but opposite. So instead of lying on our front, we lay on our back, and then air will fill up through our back first. The low reach predominantly stretches the tissue, or puts the tissues into an eccentric orientation around ribs T5 to 7, and that's going to be the area that predominantly gets restricted or compressed to prevent external rotation. So restoring that will allow our humerus to externally rotate a little bit more, will allow our forearm to pronate a little bit more, and everything to relax and untwist. Exactly the same, just opposites. So we're trying to get back to this kind of like neutral balance state all the time. The further we deviate out, the more differences there are. The less we deviate out, the less differences we are. So if I was you, or anyone really, if I had an elbow pain or even a shoulder pain, I would test for my internal and external rotation and just be like, oh, I have elbow pain and I'm limited on internal rotation. Perhaps I'll do the all-4 breathing, which will restore internal rotation and remedy medial elbow pain. Or perhaps I've got lateral elbow pain. Oh, I'm restricted in external rotation. I will do the hook lying with a low reach and restore external rotation of the humerus and allow lateral elbow pain to kind of relieve itself a little bit. So there's a lot of fucking words there: internal, external, lateral, medial. There's too many things. But essentially, outside elbow pain, restore external rotation, hook lying drill. Inside elbow pain, restore internal rotation, all-4 breathing drill.